Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It was the kind of autumn evening in the Appalachian foothills that seemed to whisper secrets on the wind. The park, an expansive national reserve of towering pines and craggy outcrops, sprawled over a patchwork of dense forest and open glens. I had just finished a routine patrol when I returned to the ranger station, a modest, weathered building that had seen generations of park rangers come and go. The building itself, nestled against a backdrop of rust-colored mountains and dotted with century-old structures, exuded an air of rugged resilience. I settled into one of the worn leather couches by the stone fireplace, a relic from a bygone era that still managed to hold back the chill of the evening. That night, as the amber glow of the fire danced on the walls, I found myself in the company of my fellow rangers, Harland, Anthony, and Craig. We were on a late shift, a quiet, solitary time when nature seemed to reclaim its dominion over man, and the usual chatter of daytime visitors had been replaced by the murmurs of wind and distant wildlife. Harland, the most experienced of us, had been with the park longer than any of us, and was known not only for his unparalleled knowledge of the wilderness, but also for his uncanny ability to recall the darkest, most compelling tales of our region's past. We'd just been discussing a light-hearted story about Craig's cousin's wedding, when Anthony, with his curious eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, leaned forward and asked Harland for his scariest account from his years patrolling these wild lands. I remember the quiet pause that fell over the room, an almost tangible anticipation, as Harland's face turned somber. Finally, in a tone as clear as the mountain streams and as grave as the ancient trees outside, he said, "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek." That single sentence stopped us all in our tracks. In that moment, our casual chatter gave way to a hush, as if the very walls of the station were straining to listen. Harland's voice had that rare quality that could transport you to another time and place, a voice that had witnessed the strange, unexplained happenings of our beloved park. Born into a family whose roots ran as deep as the forest floor itself, he had grown up with the stories passed down by his forefathers. Stories that blurred the lines between myth and reality, of curses and restless spirits, and of a mysterious figure that had haunted these woods for as long as anyone could remember. As Harland began to speak, his words painted a picture of a bygone era. He recalled a time when the land was both bountiful and unpredictable, a period when a severe drought had been followed by a harvest failure, so dire that even the hardiest folk of our small Appalachian town were left with barely enough to survive the winter. According to local lore, that very year, a curse was cast upon the land by a mysterious witch who had roamed the woods long before settlers ever cleared the forest floor. The legend had grown with each retelling. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of inexplicable fires, of people who vanished without a trace, and of eerie artifacts discovered near the sites of these strange disappearances. Harland recounted how, in the wake of the disastrous harvest, misfortune struck relentlessly. A series of inexplicable events. Homes mysteriously set ablaze, livestock falling ill without any rational cause, and even a few unaccounted-for disappearances plagued the town. The people whispered that these misfortunes were the work of a vengeful spirit, an embodiment of nature's wrath, exacting retribution on a community that had grown too complacent in its prosperity. As the full moon rose on crisp, clear nights, the eerie silence of the woods would be broken by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl, a reminder that the wild held secrets far beyond our understanding. Harlan's narrative was laced with both skepticism and genuine dread. My Uncle George, a hardened lumberjack who'd seen more of these forests than most of us could ever imagine, once told me that there was truth in the tale, however wrapped in myth it might be. He said that on full moon nights, the boundary between our world and something darker thinned, and if you listened closely, you might hear whispers among the pines that warned of impending doom. He described how, in those troubled days, people began noticing inexplicable signs. Small, meticulously carved wooden dolls that appeared near the spots where someone had gone missing, strange symbols etched into the bark of ancient trees, and odd patterns in the arrangement of stones near the creek that ran alongside the park. These signs, he explained, were more than mere coincidence. They were an echo of something that defied logic. As if drawn by an unseen hand, the community's collective fear grew until it culminated in a desperate act. A group of townsfolk, driven by equal parts terror and determination, discovered an abandoned cottage near Blackthorn Creek. Its walls bore symbols that defied explanation, markings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. In a frenzy, they armed themselves with torches and marched to the dilapidated structure. What followed was a night of chaos and fire, as the angry mob set the cottage ablaze, watching in horror as the flames struggled to consume it. A fire that, by all accounts, burned far too long, as though something within the structure resisted its destruction. I sat there, mesmerized by every word, as Harlan's tone shifted subtly from one of detached storytelling to personal confession. I remember being a young ranger, not yet hardened by the weight of solitude and long, desolate nights. I'd grown up among these very trees, and though I listened to the tales, I never truly believed in them until the night that changed everything. That night, he continued, was marked by an unsettling convergence of elements. The memory of that early November evening was vivid in his mind. The remnants of Halloween, a season of costumes and laughter, had faded, replaced by an oppressive darkness that crept in earlier each day as the weather turned colder. Harlan had been on a routine patrol, ensuring that the trails were free of the scattered damp leaves that threatened to obscure the paths. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying foliage, and a low fog began to settle over the land, muffling sound and distorting shapes. As he made his way back to the station after a long day's work, the skies opened up in a sudden, relentless downpour. Harlan's recollection was unflinching. The rain, once a gentle patter, had turned into a deafening drumming on the roof of his truck, echoing his rising apprehension. Inside the station, with the storm raging outside and the warmth of the fire offering scant consolation, Harlan had sought refuge. He settled into his routine, ordering a pizza from a nearby joint known for its prompt service in these remote parts, and planned a quiet evening of reading. But fate, it seemed, had other designs. Derek, the young pizza delivery driver with earnest eyes and a knack for punctuality, arrived in the dim light. Their brief conversation took a strange turn when Derek, glancing nervously toward the forest, mentioned that he'd seen something unusual. A solitary figure, a woman, lurking near the station. Harlan's heart pounded as he recalled Derek's hesitant tone and the inexplicable dread that followed his words. At that moment, the stillness of the station was shattered by a voice, a low, insistent murmur that seemed to come from the very darkness beyond the windows. "Get out!" The command, delivered in an almost imperceptible whisper, filled the room with an icy terror. Harlan described that feeling as if fear had become a physical presence, coiling around him until every nerve vibrated with alarm. For a moment, time itself seemed to stall as he peered into the gloom beyond the firelight. Shadows shifted in the distance, and for several agonizing moments he could have sworn he saw multiple figures emerging from the underbrush. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the shapes dissolved into the night. The memory of that night, and the chill that had seeped into his bones, had never left him. Even now, decades later, the weight of that experience rested heavily on his shoulders. His recounting of these events was measured and devoid of exaggeration, yet every listener felt the palpable terror that had gripped him then. The story of that night was more than just folklore. It was a visceral encounter with the inexplicable, a brush with a realm that defied the mundane logic of our everyday lives. As the fire crackled softly in the background, Harlan's narrative slowed, and I could sense that the most unsettling details were yet to come. The recounting of a curse, the warnings passed down through generations, and that singular haunting moment when a voice had commanded him to flee. It all coalesced into a prelude of dread that set the stage for what would come next. And in that charged silence, with the storm still howling outside and the woods beyond the station holding their ancient secrets, it was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. With each passing year, I, along with the other rangers, began noticing subtle yet unmistakable signs that the event had left an indelible mark on the fabric of the park. There were nights when the air itself seemed charged with anticipation, as if the woods were waiting for something to happen. It was during one of these nights that I found myself alone on a solo patrol along a secluded trail near Blackthorn Creek. The moon, though largely hidden by drifting clouds, cast an eerie silver sheen over the forest floor, and the sound of the wind through the pine needles carried an almost mournful quality. I recalled Harlan's voice from that long-ago evening, and felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the autumn air. The trail wound its way through dense thickets and around ancient groves, and I could almost sense that every rustle and creak had a deeper meaning, a message from the wilderness itself. As I trudged along the narrow path, my flashlight slicing through the darkness, I encountered a series of inexplicable phenomena that defied easy explanation. First, there were the footprints. Not the typical prints left by deer or coyotes, but distinct, almost human-like imprints in the soft, muddy ground. They were spaced apart in a deliberate, measured rhythm, as though a group had deliberately traversed this path. I bent down to examine them more closely. The impressions were crisp, each step marked by an unusual indentation that vanished abruptly near a copse of ancient oak trees. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, for it resonated with the many tales of vanishing people and strange happenings in these woods. Continuing on, I came across an area where the vegetation had been unnaturally disturbed. The underbrush was cleared away in a straight line, as though something or someone had passed through with an intention beyond mere traversal. The ground was littered with small, intricately carved wooden figurines. They were unlike any local wildlife. Rather, they resembled crude effigies, each one bearing the unmistakable mark of craftsmanship that suggested ritualistic intent. The craftsmanship was rough, yet deliberate, as if someone had fashioned them in a hurried manner under the pressure of a secretive compulsion. I knelt there, heart pounding, and wondered if these signs were somehow connected to the legend of the Witch of Blackthorn Creek. In the distance, the gentle hum of the creek reached my ears, a sound that was both soothing and haunting. I moved closer, compelled by an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth behind these strange markings. The creek, swollen from recent rains, rushed along a narrow channel lined with moss-covered rocks. It was here that I found the most unnerving evidence of all. A series of symbols etched deep into the bark of a towering pine. The carvings were complex, intertwining shapes that seemed to defy logic, and yet resonated with a primal rhythm. I could not help but feel that the tree itself was a silent witness to the events that had unfolded in this forsaken corner of the park. My thoughts raced back to Harlan's account. The warning that if one ever felt a deep, inexplicable dread, it was a sign that something was amiss. The feeling was now all too real. As I stood there, transfixed by the etched symbols, I heard a soft rustling behind me. I spun around, my pulse quickening, and caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure disappearing behind a clump of ferns. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its outline barely perceptible against the murk of the woods. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, perhaps, or a wandering animal. But deep down, I knew that it was far more unsettling than that. The further I ventured into the night, the more the boundary between the known and the unknown seemed to blur. I began hearing soft murmurs carried on the wind, whispers that spoke of ancient wrongs and lingering curses. At one point, I could have sworn that the sound of my own footsteps was being mimicked by another presence, a silent shadow that moved in parallel, always a few paces behind me. Every instinct screamed that I should turn back, yet a morbid curiosity, fueled by the same blend of skepticism and trepidation that had marked Harlan's early years, drove me onward. Hours later, as the night deepened and the forest seemed to hold its breath, I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated structure, a remnant of a bygone era that had once served as a secluded outpost for early settlers. The building, its wooden frame warped by time and weather, bore the scars of neglect and the encroachment of nature. Its windows, long shattered, looked like empty eye sockets staring blankly into the abyss. I hesitated at the threshold, feeling as though the building itself was a portal to something long forgotten, yet ominously present. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint odor of decay. My flashlight revealed remnants of a life once lived. Old photographs with faded smiles, a rusted lantern, and scattered papers that hinted at secrets best left undisturbed. As I explored the interior, I discovered a journal bound in cracked leather. The entries, dated back to the early 1900s, chronicled the daily struggles of a lone caretaker who had once inhabited the outpost. But as I read further, the tone shifted to one of mounting despair and paranoia. The caretaker wrote of strange sounds echoing in the corridors, of shadows that moved of their own accord, and of a persistent feeling that he was being watched by something malevolent. One entry ended abruptly with the words, "The witch's curse is real. I can hear her. She's coming." The journal's final line sent a chill through me. It described a night not unlike my own, when the rain had stopped and the air was heavy with the promise of retribution. I left the outpost with a sense of foreboding that clung to me like a second skin. Outside, the forest seemed to pulse with an eerie vitality. The earlier signs, the footprints, the figurines, the etched symbols, now appeared as parts of a larger, more sinister tapestry. I began to wonder if the curse was not just a legend, but an active force in these woods, one that had grown bolder with each passing year. As I made my way back to the ranger station, the once familiar path seemed transformed. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth carried a weight of intention. I felt as though unseen eyes tracked my every move, and the wind whispered secrets that I couldn't quite decipher. By the time I reached the station, my mind was a maelstrom of questions and fears. I reported my findings to my supervisor, careful to note every detail, every inexplicable mark that might suggest that the old legend was more than mere folklore. But even as I documented the evidence, a nagging feeling of dread persisted. I couldn't shake the thought that I had disturbed something that had lain dormant for far too long. That night, as I sat in the quiet confines of my small room in the station, I listened to the distant sounds of the forest. The wind seemed to carry faint echoes of voices, whispers that merged with the natural chorus of nocturnal creatures. I couldn't help but recall Harlan's admonition. That gut instinct, that raw feeling of terror, was a warning not to be ignored. I stared out the window at the dark, impenetrable mass of trees, wondering if somewhere out there, the curse was still alive and waiting to be awakened once more. By the time I finally drifted into a troubled sleep, the images of those carved symbols, the inexplicable footprints, and the haunting whispers of the wind were seared into my mind. I awoke before dawn, heart still pounding with a residual fear, and vowed that I would seek answers, even if it meant confronting the very legend that had haunted these lands for generations. The descent into darkness had begun, and I could feel it deep in my bones. The promise of a truth too terrible to face, yet impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, an uneasy silence enveloped the ranger station. The park's usual daytime bustle had long since faded into a memory, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to seep into every crevice of the building. I spent hours reviewing the notes and photographs I had taken on that night, desperate to piece together the puzzle of what I had witnessed. The evidence was as perplexing as it was disturbing. Footprints that defied natural explanation, ritualistic carvings on ancient bark, and remnants of a long-forgotten journal hinting at an old curse that might still be active. Every detail pointed toward a force beyond our comprehension, a presence that had existed long before the park's creation, and perhaps would persist long after we were gone. Word of my experience began to ripple through the small community of rangers, igniting hushed conversations during breaks and sparking furtive glances among those who had long held secret doubts about the legends of Blackthorn Creek. Harlan, whose own tale had once been met with a blend of skepticism and admiration, now seemed burdened by an unspoken responsibility. He spent long hours in quiet reflection by the fire, his eyes distant as if replaying memories of that cursed night. I watched him one evening, and for a moment it seemed that the weight of the forest's secrets was too much for him to bear. His silence was a stark reminder that the horrors of the past were not easily forgotten. Determined to find a resolution, I took it upon myself to delve deeper into the park's archives. I combed through old records, historical accounts, and even the scattered oral histories preserved by longtime residents of the nearby town. What I discovered only deepened the mystery. There were documented accounts of unexplained disappearances, mysterious fires, and eerie phenomena dating back well into the early 1900s. Local newspapers, yellowed with age, recounted bizarre events. A series of incidents on full moon nights, inexplicable sightings of a shadowy figure near Blackthorn Creek, and, most disturbingly, references to a woman in tattered clothing seen wandering the woods. These stories were interwoven with the fabric of the community's collective memory, passed down as cautionary tales to ensure that future generations would respect the power of the wilderness. Yet, even as I immersed myself in the lore, I began to notice a pattern emerging. Every account, whether spoken in hushed tones by an elderly resident or recorded in the faded pages of a century-old journal, contained striking similarities. A night of relentless rain, an air thick with foreboding, and a sudden, inexplicable event that shattered the semblance of safety. It became clear that the curse was not simply a myth conjured by overactive imaginations. It was an enduring presence that manifested under very specific, almost ritualistic circumstances. One particularly stormy evening, as I prepared to leave the station after a long day of investigation, I received a phone call from Harlan. His voice, usually calm and steady, was tinged with urgency. "Meet me at the old lookout on Blackthorn Ridge," he said, barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to see." With little hesitation, I gathered my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, my mind racing with both anticipation and dread. The drive to Blackthorn Ridge was a solitary journey through winding back roads that cut through the heart of the wilderness. The radio played low, melancholy tunes that somehow seemed to echo the sorrow of the land. When I finally arrived at the lookout, a crumbling stone structure that had once served as a sentinel over the vast expanse of forest, I found Harland waiting near the edge. The wind whipped around us as we gazed out over a landscape bathed in the ghostly light of a partially obscured full moon. In the distance, the dense canopy of trees rippled like dark, rolling waves, and the faint shimmer of Blackthorn Creek snaked its way through the underbrush. Harland pointed to a small clearing just beyond the ridge. "I've been coming here every year on this night," he said, his voice low and haunted. "Ever since that night, I've left a single wildflower as a marker, a symbol of remembrance and, perhaps, a plea for peace." I followed his gaze, and there, in the dewy grass, lay a solitary white blossom, its petals pristine against the dark earth. But as I knelt to examine it, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, a pressure that seemed to emanate from the very air around us. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a series of muffled sounds. At first, it was the distant call of an owl, but then it grew into something more, a low, rhythmic murmur that resonated through the clearing. Harland and I exchanged tense glances, both of us acutely aware that we were not alone. The sound, almost imperceptible at first, began to swell into an eerie chorus of whispers, a language that defied comprehension, yet carried a message of despair and warning. As the wind howled and the trees swayed violently, I could swear that figures emerged from the darkness beyond the ridge. They moved with a deliberate, almost ritualistic grace, their forms indistinct yet undeniably human. The sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a spectral procession that seemed to be drawn from the depths of an ancient nightmare. Harland's hand trembled as he clutched his worn cap, his eyes fixed on the distant shapes. "They're here," he murmured, voice barely audible above the cacophony of the wind and whispers. "I've known they'd come back. This night, it's not the first time." In that moment, time itself seemed to fracture. The natural world around us, once so familiar and comforting, transformed into an alien landscape of shifting shadows and echoing voices. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to process what I was witnessing. Were these the very manifestations of the curse that had tormented our community for generations? Or were they remnants of an event too terrible to fully comprehend? A glimpse into a realm where the boundaries between life and death, reality and myth, had been irreparably blurred. The procession drew closer, their forms now discernible as a group of individuals clad in dark, period-specific attire, their faces obscured by hoods and the dim light of the moon. They moved in silence, an organized yet inexplicable ritual that seemed to draw power from the very land itself. One figure, slightly ahead of the rest, turned briefly toward us. I could see, for a fleeting second, eyes that glowed with an unearthly light, a gaze that seemed to pierce the veil of time and expose the darkest recesses of one's soul. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, or to flee from this encroaching nightmare, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I was left with an overwhelming sense of foreboding, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. Harland broke the silence with a strained whisper. "We need to leave now. There's no telling what they intend." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed my arm and began guiding me away from the ridge. Yet, even as we retreated, I could not shake the image of those ghostly figures and the chilling realization that the events of that night were only the beginning of something far more sinister. Back at the station in the following days, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty and dread. The local authorities were baffled by the series of inexplicable events that had plagued the park. Security cameras recorded fleeting images of dark-clad figures breaking through the front door of the ranger station itself, a momentary glimpse of intruders who left no trace behind. 6 masked individuals, moving with the precision of professionals, had come and gone in a matter of minutes, leaving behind a lingering question. What was their true purpose? Rumors swirled among the rangers and the local community. Some insisted that the figures were nothing more than opportunistic criminals, while others whispered that they were somehow connected to the ancient curse. Agents of the past come to reclaim what was once lost. Every night thereafter, as the full moon rose over the park and the wind whispered its timeless secrets, I couldn't help but feel that the events of that November night had awoken something dormant in the woods. Harlan's ritual of leaving a single wildflower by the spot where Derek had once seen that mysterious woman became a solemn reminder of the past. A ritual imbued with hope, despair, and an unspoken pact with the unseen. Yet the deeper I delved into the mystery, the more I realized that some questions might forever remain unanswered. The forest, with all its ancient power and hidden depths, guarded its secrets fiercely. And as the days turned into weeks, the line between legend and reality grew increasingly blurred. Late one evening, I found myself alone in the station's small library, poring over the old journals and documents that chronicled the park's troubled history. The records were riddled with contradictions and incomplete accounts, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that led to more questions than answers. I could almost feel the presence of those long-gone souls, the caretaker, the witch, the lost wanderers, watching over the pages with silent disapproval. Every now and then, a creak in the floorboard or the sudden gust of wind through a cracked window would remind me that I was not alone in my pursuit of the truth. The unresolved mystery weighed heavily on me. I began to suspect that the curse was not merely an isolated event from the past, but rather an ever-present force, a living, breathing entity woven into the fabric of the park. It seemed to feed on the fears and doubts of those who dwelled within its boundaries, resurfacing in cycles that defied the linear progression of time. And so, as I prepared to document my findings for the next round of reports, I could not shake the feeling that I was merely scratching the surface of a vast and ominous enigma. The final night of that tumultuous week arrived with an oppressive darkness that swallowed even the faintest light. I found myself back at Blackthorn Ridge, compelled by a need to confront the unknown. The moon hung low and cloudy, its light barely penetrating the thick canopy overhead. In the solitude of that desolate clearing, I set up a small recording device, determined to capture any unusual sounds or voices that might provide further clues about the curse. For hours, I sat in silence, listening to the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of the creek, and the erratic beating of my own heart. Then, just as the night was about to yield to the creeping pre-dawn, it happened again. A whisper so soft and insistent that it defied explanation. "Now," it said. A single, resonant word that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath me. I froze, every muscle taut with terror, as the familiar chill of forewarning washed over me. The forest around me grew still, as if holding its breath, and I knew without a doubt that the ancient curse was stirring once more. In that frozen moment, the recorders, the cameras, and every instinct I possessed bore silent witness to a truth far beyond human understanding, a truth that would haunt me for the rest of my days. And so, with the first hints of dawn on the horizon, I packed up my equipment and made my way back to the station, my mind a swirling vortex of dread, wonder, and a determination to uncover the unfathomable mystery that had claimed so many lives. I knew that the events of that final night were merely the prelude to something much larger, a darkness that, once awakened, would never be fully contained. As I reached the station, the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the land, and I couldn't help but wonder, had the curse finally been unleashed, or was it simply biding its time, waiting for the next full moon to remind us that some secrets are better left undisturbed? When I was a child, growing up in the vast, rugged wilderness of Montana, my world was painted in hues of deep green pine, dusty red canyons, and the whispered legends of those who dedicated their lives to guarding nature's secrets. My father was one such guardian, a seasoned park ranger whose weathered face and steady eyes spoke of years spent amidst towering firs, rocky crags, and silent graveyards of lost rangers. Every time our old pickup rumbled along the winding dirt roads near the park's boundary, he would instruct me with a peculiar, almost ritualistic habit. "Hold your breath as we pass the old cemetery," he would say, his voice low and reverent. I didn't know why he insisted on it, and I never questioned him. The cemetery, marked by time-worn headstones and the names of rangers who had long since passed, seemed to carry a gravity, a silent charge of respect, and a hint of unspoken fear. I would mimic his every move, inhaling sharply only to hold it in suspended silence, as if by doing so I could somehow honor the memory of those who had given their lives in service to the land. My father's gentle nod and a thin, nervous smile always followed once we resumed breathing, a quiet acknowledgement to forces unseen. That childhood lesson, as strange as it seemed, became an indelible part of my being. The moment I caught a glimpse of the mossy headstones or the faded granite inscriptions, my mind would slip back to those long, silent drives. And in the rustle of the aspen leaves, I sometimes thought I heard the soft echo of a ranger's farewell. Years passed. I left home for college, and the memory of those days became a blend of nostalgia and myth. But fate has a curious way of reuniting us with our past. A decade after my departure, I returned to Montana, a changed man, yet still tethered to the land by unseen strings. The landscape was the same: endless stretches of rugged terrain, vast skies, and deep forests harboring secrets. But my father, now older and bearing the marks of time like the weathered stones of his beloved cemetery, had remarried. His new wife, Linda, was a striking figure with a blend of practicality and unconventional charm that both unsettled and enchanted me. Linda wasn't a stranger to the wilderness either. As a current park ranger with a storied past of her own, she moved through the forest with an assured gait, and her eyes shone with a mix of mischief and ancient wisdom. Her very presence transformed our family gatherings into excursions that blurred the line between the tangible and the mysterious. One brisk autumn morning, the day after my return, Linda proposed an adventure that would soon lead us deep into a forgotten corner of the park, a place that held both historical significance and an almost palpable aura of unease. We climbed into her trusty '97 Jeep Wrangler, a vehicle as rugged and storied as the trails it had seen. The engine's rumble was a lullaby of the open road, and the windows were down so that the cool, pine-scented breeze could carry the tales of yesteryears into our hearts. As we navigated through narrow backroads flanked by clusters of evergreens and meandering streams, I couldn't help but recall my father's childhood instructions. Each time a dilapidated stone marker or an unkempt cemetery came into view, my body reacted with an automatic, almost instinctive pause. A momentary cessation of breath, a nod to that long-forgotten superstition. The land we traversed was steeped in history. There were old markers indicating ranger campsites, abandoned lookout towers that jutted from the hillside like broken teeth, and a cemetery that lay off the main road, largely untouched by time. In that cemetery, the headstones were worn smooth by years of wind and rain, and some were so faded that their inscriptions could barely be deciphered. I remembered my father's tone, a quiet urgency, as he had once said that these stones were not just markers of life and death, but silent witnesses to the sacrifices made in service of nature. Linda's presence beside me was a blend of warmth and an inscrutable calm. She would occasionally glance over with a knowing smile, as if to silently ask whether I too felt the uncanny energy that suffused the land. At one point, while passing the cemetery, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a young girl standing near a weathered headstone. Her pale eyes, framed by dark, unruly hair, seemed to pierce through the layers of time. I blinked, and she was gone. Yet her image lingered in my memory like a whispered secret. That day, as we veered off the main road onto a gravel path marked by an old wooden sign reading Ranger Station, 1923, Linda's excitement was palpable. "I know just the place we should check out," she said with a spark in her eyes that bordered on mischief. I hesitated, recalling the tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena that old-timers often recounted around campfires. But curiosity, that ever-potent lure, pushed me forward. We parked the Jeep in a clearing where the trees arched overhead like ancient guardians, and together we stepped into a realm where past and present intermingled. The abandoned ranger station loomed before us, a decrepit building half swallowed by nature, its wooden panels warped and rusted fixtures hanging askew. Its very walls seemed to hum with the residual energy of decades past. As Linda produced an old leather satchel from the back seat, a relic that carried the scent of musty paper and history, my heart quickened with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. In that moment, the old habits of my childhood resurfaced, the ritual of silent homage to the past, of holding one's breath in the face of something both sacred and foreboding. The station's interior was a museum of forgotten times, dusty maps, yellowed documents, and a faded portrait of a ranger in uniform that hung crookedly on a wall. I could almost hear the faint murmurs of voices long silenced and the rustle of old leaves brought in by the wind. Linda's voice broke through the silence. "There's more to these walls than meets the eye," she whispered, her tone both inviting and cautionary. And as I stood there, absorbing every creak and shadow, I knew that our journey had only just begun. A journey that would pull us deeper into a mystery as old as the trails themselves. Even now, I can recall that day with a blend of awe and an undercurrent of dread. It was the beginning of an odyssey into a realm where the natural and the supernatural intertwined. A day when the voices of the past spoke through the rustle of leaves, and when the very act of holding one's breath became a bridge between memory and the present. Little did I know then that the secrets of the forest would soon unravel, dragging me into a labyrinth of visions and revelations that would haunt me for years to come. The crisp morning air had barely given way to the chill of early autumn when our journey took a darker turn. Linda and I, now accompanied by her quiet but enigmatic brother Dennis, a man whose laughter was as dry as the crackle of dead leaves, ventured further from the well-trodden trails. The abandoned ranger station receded behind us, replaced by a network of overgrown paths and narrow ravines where nature reigned supreme and time itself seemed to slow. As we pressed on, the forest thickened, and the light filtered through the canopy in muted golden streams. The tranquility of the wilderness was palpable, yet there was an underlying tension in the air, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets of old. The path wound along a creek that gurgled over moss-covered rocks, its waters reflecting a distorted image of our passing figures. I felt an inexplicable pull, a lure that beckoned us deeper into the heart of a mystery that had long lain dormant. Linda led the way with an unwavering determination. "There's a spot I used to visit," she explained softly, her voice nearly swallowed by the rustle of the forest. "A clearing near an old lookout where the veil between our world and what lies beyond feels thinner." Her eyes gleamed with both nostalgia and something else, a hint of melancholy or perhaps a secret she dared not fully share. Dennis, walking a few paces behind us, remained quiet, his presence like a steady heartbeat in the wilderness. I couldn't shake the feeling that he, too, carried memories of this land. Memories of events too strange or painful to speak of openly. The three of us moved in a silent, unspoken pact, each of us aware that we were stepping into a realm where the ordinary rules of time and space no longer applied. After an hour's trek through dense undergrowth and past towering pines, we reached a clearing that seemed almost otherworldly in its stillness. In the center stood a solitary, weather-beaten wooden structure, a lookout tower that had once served as a sentinel for the park. Its ladder, now creaking and half-consumed by rust and vines, beckoned us to climb. I hesitated at the base, feeling an odd mix of nostalgia and foreboding. Every board, every nail, seemed to vibrate with the echoes of the past, of watchful eyes and lonely vigils kept under the vast, unyielding sky. "Come on," Linda urged, her tone light yet insistent. "It's just an old tower. There's nothing to be afraid of." Her smile was reassuring, though I could detect a flicker of uncertainty in the way her eyes darted to the dark recesses of the structure. I followed her lead and began the climb, each step accompanied by a creak that resonated like a ghostly whisper. The higher I climbed, the more the world below began to fade. The forest, the creek, even the distant hum of civilization, all receded into a soft blur. At the top of the tower, I was greeted by a panoramic view of the wilderness, a patchwork of amber fields, dense forests, and winding roads that disappeared into the horizon. Yet even this breathtaking vista was tinged with a surreal melancholy. There, in the far distance, I could just make out the outline of a cemetery, an eerie reminder of the past that never truly left us behind. As we lingered there, a peculiar sensation began to settle over me. The wind, which had earlier been a playful caress, now seemed to carry voices, faint, indistinct murmurs that spoke in a language older than time. I strained to catch their meaning, but all I could decipher were fragments of words. Remember, never, lost. It was as if the very air around us was laden with the memories of those who had long since departed. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Linda exchanged a glance with Dennis before replying. "It's just the wind," she said, though her tone was less confident than before. "But sometimes, when you're out here, you can almost feel the presence of those who once guarded these lands." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I thought of the childhood ritual, of holding one's breath as we passed sacred grounds, and wondered if it was more than mere superstition. Perhaps it was a silent acknowledgement of forces that lingered in the space between the seen and the unseen. After our brief respite in the tower, we descended and retraced our steps toward another part of the park, a location Linda referred to only as the Overlook. The journey was slower now, as if the forest itself had slowed time. The canopy above grew denser, and the interplay of light and shadow created patterns that danced across the forest floor like fleeting specters. Along the way, Dennis pointed out subtle details, a rusted ranger's helmet half buried under a pile of leaves, a faded plaque on a rock that bore the initials of a long-departed ranger, and each detail deepened the sense of melancholy and loss. At the overlook, we found an ancient stone bench set against a backdrop of towering evergreens. It was a place where silence reigned, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant hawk or the soft murmur of the wind. Linda sat there for a long time, her gaze lost in the distance, as if trying to commune with something just beyond our reach. I took my place beside her, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in. There was a palpable energy here, a magnetic pull that suggested that every stone, every tree, held a piece of a larger story. As dusk began to settle, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows grew longer, and the temperature dropped, lending an edge of urgency to our journey. It was in that twilight that I first sensed an inexplicable presence. At the very edge of my vision, I saw what appeared to be a small figure, a child, perhaps, standing silently by a gnarled oak tree. The figure was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes held an intensity that belied its apparent fragility. I blinked, and the vision was gone, swallowed by the deepening gloom. Yet, even as I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a gnawing unease took root. Had I truly seen someone there, or was it the forest playing tricks on a mind already strained by the weight of memories and whispered legends? Linda's voice broke through my thoughts. "It's time to head back," she said gently, though I detected an undercurrent of urgency in her tone that I hadn't noticed before. We began the journey back along the now familiar trail, the forest around us seeming to shift and breathe with secrets. Every step felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth of the past, a past that refused to remain silent. The memory of the child at the oak tree, the murmuring voices carried by the wind, and the unspoken weight of centuries of guardian duty all coalesced into a feeling of impending revelation. As the last light of day faded, a profound darkness settled over the land, a darkness that promised that our encounter with the mysteries of the park was far from over. Night had long fallen by the time we returned to the abandoned station, and the forest had taken on an altogether different persona. The cool darkness was punctuated only by the faint gleam of stars and the intermittent glow of our flashlights as we navigated the twisting trails back to familiar ground. I felt that the forest, in its nocturnal guise, was not a benign place but rather a realm of secrets and spectral visitors, a domain where the boundaries between the living and the lost blurred into a single, haunting tapestry. Back at the ranger station, the silence was profound. The old wooden floors creaked beneath our tentative steps, and the musty odor of decay mingled with the metallic tang of old machinery. Linda's satchel, now resting on a rickety table, seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, as if it were the repository of untold stories and forbidden experiments. I could not shake the sense that we had awakened something in that place, something that had been waiting patiently, hidden in the shadows of memory and neglect. Dennis, ever the quiet observer, began to recount tales that he had heard as a young boy from his own family of rangers. "There are stories about this station," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the dim light of a lone lamp. "Stories of apparitions, of lost souls that still linger among these walls. Some say that on nights like this, you can hear the echoes of footsteps in the corridors long after everyone has gone to bed." His voice carried both reverence and regret, a mixture of awe for the mysteries of the past and sorrow for the unhealed wounds that time could not erase. As Dennis spoke, the atmosphere in the room grew thicker, charged with a tension that was almost palpable. I found myself drawn to a faded photograph that hung crookedly on the wall, a portrait of a young ranger in uniform, his eyes wide and full of unspoken fears. The resemblance to the little girl I had seen earlier was unsettling. The photograph's edges were worn, and the inscription at the back was barely legible, but I could make out the words, "In memory of those who watched over us." Linda's eyes wandered over the same photograph. "That was her," she murmured, her tone a mix of sorrow and wonder. "My sister." The revelation hit me like a sudden gust of wind. Here, in this forgotten station, the ghosts of the past were not mere tales, but lived memories etched into the very fabric of the place. Linda had never spoken of her past in detail, and now the weight of family loss mingled with the eerie ambience of our surroundings. We decided to set up a small camp in one of the unused rooms of the station, a space that had once been a break room for weary rangers. The room was sparse, a dilapidated table, a few rickety chairs, and a long abandoned map of the park pinned to the wall. As we settled in, the outside world receded, leaving only the crackle of an old portable radio and the steady hum of our anxious breathing. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay on a cot with a single blanket, my eyes fixed on the murky ceiling, as the faint echoes of the past seemed to whisper all around me. Every creak, every rustle became a signal, a reminder that I was not alone. The darkness was alive with memories and spectral presences, and my mind, already teetering on the brink of the rational and the fantastical, struggled to make sense of it all. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A child's laughter, light and tinkling, yet filled with an eerie sadness. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to listen in the oppressive silence. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the wind or the echo of my own thoughts. But as the sound grew clearer, I realized it wasn't the playful giggle of a carefree child, but rather something far more haunting, a sound that carried with it an unmistakable note of grief and warning. I rose quietly, careful not to disturb Linda or Dennis, and followed the sound down a narrow corridor. The passage was lined with old lockers and faded notices, and the only illumination came from the weak beam of my flashlight. The laughter seemed to come from behind a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, uncertain if what lay beyond would bring solace or terror. With a deep breath, one that I deliberately held for just a moment longer, I pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dim room that looked like it had once been a storeroom. In the far corner, barely visible in the gloom, stood the spectral form of a little girl. Her eyes, dark and hollow, fixed on me with an intensity that belied her ghostly form. Her dress was tattered and stained, and her hair hung in disarray, as if she had been caught in a perpetual state of sorrow. For a long, agonizing moment, we simply stared at one another, caught in a suspended dialogue of silent agony and unspoken memories. Then, as if sensing my intrusion, she lifted a small hand in a feeble gesture of farewell, before dissipating into a mist that swirled around my feet. The shock of the encounter sent a tremor through me. I rushed back to the main room, where Linda and Dennis waited in anxious silence. "Did you see her?" I asked, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and wonder. Linda's eyes glistened with tears as she nodded slowly. "I always hoped I'd see her again," she whispered, the pain of loss evident in every syllable. "But I never thought it would be like this." Dennis remained silent, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Regret, sorrow, and something darker that I couldn't quite decipher. That night, as the wind howled outside and the old station groaned under the weight of its history, I lay awake with a mind tormented by questions. Who was this little girl? Was she truly Linda's lost sister, or was she a symbol, a spectral embodiment of the sacrifices made by those who had given their lives to protect these lands? The echoes of her presence lingered in every shadow and every whisper of the wind. and I began to realize that the station was not merely a building of memories, but a living, breathing repository of the past's unresolved tragedies. In the days that followed our nocturnal encounter, the park took on a life of its own. Our return to civilization was marked not by relief, but by an overwhelming sense that we had merely scratched the surface of a mystery that spanned generations. I found myself haunted by dreams, vivid, unbidden visions of the little girl, her eyes filled with sorrow and silent accusations. Each night, as darkness draped itself over the rugged landscape of Montana, I felt the invisible pull of the past drawing me back to that forgotten station, to the lonely paths where the wind carried voices and memories. Determined to understand what had transpired, Linda, Dennis, and I embarked on a relentless quest for answers. We pored over old ranger logs, dusty archival records, and faded photographs that chronicled the legacy of those who had once patrolled the wilderness. Every document was a piece of a puzzle, and slowly an unsettling picture began to emerge. The station had been the site of a tragedy, a day marked by a series of inexplicable disappearances and mysterious deaths. The records hinted at the loss of a young ranger's daughter, a child whose life had been tragically cut short in an accident on the very roads we had traversed as children. Over time, whispers among the rangers had suggested that her spirit never found rest, that she lingered in the halls of the station, silently mourning a past that refused to fade. Linda, who had long carried the burden of personal loss, confessed that she had once believed the legends were mere superstition, until the day she encountered the ghost of her own sister. Her voice, though steady, betrayed the weight of memories too painful to fully express. "I've always felt her presence," she confided one chilly evening as we sat huddled around a flickering campfire on the outskirts of the park. "It was as if she was calling out to me, a constant reminder that some things in this world never truly die." But it wasn't just the personal tragedies that unsettled us. It was the eerie, inexplicable phenomena that defied logical explanation. On our subsequent excursions into the heart of the park, the familiar rituals of holding one's breath when passing a cemetery became fraught with a new intensity. It was as if the very act was a key, a way to momentarily close the door between our reality and the realm of the lost. Every time I practiced that ritual, I could feel a palpable tension in the air, a charged silence that hinted at unseen eyes watching from the darkened corners of the forest. One late afternoon, as we trekked along a narrow trail that wound between ancient pines and crumbling stone markers, the landscape seemed to shift. The play of light and shadow took on an almost sentient quality. I remember stopping in my tracks as a chill wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. In that moment, the forest itself felt alive with the memories of pain and longing, a living testament to the countless souls who had passed through these woods. As we reached the site of a long-forgotten memorial, a weathered plaque that recounted the names of fallen rangers, a sudden stillness fell upon us. Dennis, who usually exuded an air of unruffled calm, grew silent. I could see his eyes narrowing as he studied the inscription, as if trying to decipher a hidden message left by time itself. "There's something written here that isn't on any of the official records," he murmured. His hand trembled slightly as he pointed to a barely discernible symbol etched into the stone, a symbol that seemed to pulse with a life of its own in the dying light. The following night, back at our temporary camp near the outskirts of the station, a fierce storm broke over the wilderness. Rain battered the tin roofs of our makeshift shelter, and lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. In the tumult, the old station, now a spectral silhouette against the storm, seemed to call out to us, its windows aglow with an eerie light. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being drawn back, compelled to confront the truth hidden behind the veil of time. As I lay awake in the darkness, the relentless patter of rain on the roof mingling with the distant rumble of thunder, I sensed a presence in the room. At first, it was a mere feeling, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, but soon it became unmistakable. The shadow of a small figure moved along the wall, its outline wavering like smoke in a gust of wind. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the lamp on my bedside table. In that moment, the figure turned toward me, a face emerging from the darkness, its eyes a mirror of sorrow and silent accusation. It was the little girl. Her appearance was transient, as though she were caught between worlds, her features blurred by the passage of time and the weight of unspoken tragedy. She mouthed a single word, a whisper that echoed in my mind long after it had faded. Remember. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, leaving behind only the memory of her desperate plea. In the aftermath, I was left with an overwhelming sense of disquiet. The park, with all its beauty and rugged splendor, had revealed a hidden undercurrent of grief and mystery. I realized that the legacy of the Rangers was not simply one of duty and sacrifice, but also of profound loss, a history written in the silent, sorrowful language of the land itself. Our investigation would eventually lead us to a final, shattering revelation, a truth that defied all rational explanation and left us with more questions than answers. The boundaries between the living and the dead had blurred beyond recognition, and I began to fear that the past might never truly release its grip on the present. As I stood on a windswept ridge overlooking the vast, dark expanse of the park, I knew that the spirit of that little girl, and the countless others whose stories had been lost in the mists of time, would haunt these trails for eternity. And so, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon and the storm slowly abated, I made a silent vow to continue seeking the truth behind the whispers of the old trails, even if it meant confronting horrors that defied explanation. For in the depths of the wilderness, where every rock and every tree bears the scars of forgotten grief, the veil that separates our world from the next is perilously thin, and some secrets once uncovered can never be put back to rest. The evening light spilled over Baxter State Park like molten gold, casting long, wavering shadows across the rugged terrain of northern Maine. I had been on my routine patrol that late autumn afternoon, a time when the forest's vibrancy began to give way to the creeping chill of winter. The rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots, mixed with the distant calls of wildlife, was a soothing lullaby for a park ranger accustomed to solitude. Yet, as I ventured deeper into a secluded region of the park, an uneasy sensation began to claw at the edges of my mind. I'd always believed that nature, for all its majesty, harbored secrets too dark for human comprehension. That belief took a new, terrifying shape that day when I chose a seldom-used trail along the steep banks of a brook. The trees here stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches weaving an intricate tapestry overhead. I was following a well-worn path, or so I thought, until a subtle shift in the forest floor, an incongruous patch of loose, uneven ground, caused my boot to slip. In a heartbeat, my body betrayed me. I lost my footing and tumbled into a hidden chasm, swallowed by the darkness below. I awoke with a jolt, the impact jarring every muscle in my body. My back throbbed fiercely, and as I tried to orient myself, the realization struck. I was not on a familiar forest trail, but in a narrow, yawning pit that seemed to exist outside the natural order of the park. The walls of this pit were slick and unnervingly cold, a texture that felt neither entirely soil nor rock. Each surface was marred by an unidentifiable viscous substance, giving them an almost otherworldly sheen in the dying light. For a long, agonizing moment I lay there in darkness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the erratic beating of my own heart. Then came the stench, a deep, putrid odor that clawed at my throat and filled my nostrils with the unmistakable tang of decay. I struggled to breathe, each inhalation a battle against the overpowering reek of death. Panic surged as I realized I wasn't simply injured. Something was dreadfully wrong with this place. I forced myself to sit up, every movement a trial as pain and fear merged into a searing agony. I fumbled for my pack, the one constant companion on these lonely shifts. My hands, slick with perspiration and trembling with shock, brushed against a battered phone. The device was a lifeline in the wilderness, yet its screen was fractured, a casualty of my fall. I pressed the power button repeatedly, willing it to come to life, but there was only the echo of my desperate attempts in the oppressive quiet. With my only modern tool rendered useless, I was left with raw instinct and an overwhelming need to escape. Clambering toward the narrow opening above, I noted the pit's peculiar features. The ground beneath me was uneven, pockmarked with depressions that resembled shallow graves. My training had taught me to be alert for natural hazards, but nothing in my experience could have prepared me for the sinister implications of what I was witnessing. Had I inadvertently stumbled upon a hidden burial ground? The very thought sent a chill racing down my spine. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I was paralyzed by the gravity of the situation. I forced myself to examine my surroundings, even as a creeping sense of dread overran my rational mind. My eyes, adjusting slowly to the dim light filtering in from above, revealed a scene that seemed impossible. Mounds of earth lay scattered across the pit's floor, and, in the periphery of my vision, shapes that might once have been human. It was as if a macabre artist had deliberately arranged a grotesque tableau of death, a mass grave concealed deep within the forest. Straining to hear beyond the suffocating silence, I could almost detect a low, constant hum, a vibration in the earth that resonated with a primal rhythm. Was it the whisper of the forest, or something far more sinister? I couldn't tell, but one thing was certain. Every instinct within me was alert, every sense straining to decipher the inexplicable. The forest outside, with its familiar calls and rustling leaves, seemed a world away now, replaced by an oppressive darkness that was as alive as it was deadly. I tried to stand, leaning heavily against the slick, clammy wall for support. Every inch of my body protested the sudden jarring movement. The chill of the wall seeped into my bones, and I realized that if I was to escape, I'd have to muster every bit of the resolve that had seen me through countless solitary nights on patrol. I surveyed the pit, my mind racing with grim calculations. Was there any possibility of climbing out? The walls were too steep and too slick to gain any foothold with the usual ranger's equipment. I was, for the moment, trapped. As minutes turned into what felt like an eternity, I tried to steady my breathing. Each shallow gasp was punctuated by the nauseating stench of decay, a reminder that time was running out. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, the raw energy of survival mixed with a paralyzing fear of the unknown. In the half-light of the encroaching dusk, the pit's edges seemed to shimmer and distort, as if taunting me with the promise of escape just beyond my reach. At the far edge of my limited vision, I could just make out a narrow fissure in the wall, a potential exit if I could only reach it. Summoning every ounce of strength, I began the painstaking climb, my hands sliding along the moist, unforgiving surface. Every movement was a battle against gravity and revulsion. The slimy substance coating the rock was like a living thing, each scrape of my fingers sending shivers of disgust and horror through me. My thoughts, normally so clear and focused, became muddled with images of long-forgotten nightmares and whispered legends of cursed grounds hidden deep in the American wilderness. In those moments, my mind drifted back to my training, a lifetime of lessons learned from surviving harsh winters and unexpected natural disasters. But nothing had prepared me for this. A descent into a hidden world where nature itself seemed to conspire against me. The potential that I had intruded upon something deliberately concealed, a secret kept by the forest, haunted me. Every crevice and every shadow whispered dark stories of the past, unsolved disappearances, unresolved mysteries, and a darkness that no human light could pierce. My muscles burned with the effort, and every slip threatened to plunge me back into the abyss. I pressed on, driven by a desperate need to escape not only the pit, but the oppressive foreboding that seeped from its very walls. As I inched upward, I caught fleeting glimpses of shapes and textures, a handprint here, a smudge of dirt there, that hinted at a history too terrible to fully comprehend. The realization struck me. I was not merely in danger of a physical fall, but of falling into the depths of a secret that the park had guarded for decades. At length, after what felt like hours of painstaking struggle, I managed to wedge my trembling hand into the narrow fissure. The gap was just wide enough to accommodate my arm, and with a forceful heave I began to pull myself upward. Each upward tug was a victory over the despair that threatened to engulf me. Yet, with every inch gained, the grim reality of my situation sank deeper into my soul. I could almost sense that the forest above was oblivious to the horror that lay beneath, a hidden scar on the land, waiting to be unearthed by fate or misfortune. As the first stars began to emerge in the deepening twilight, I finally managed to scrape my way out of the pit. Collapsing onto a narrow ledge, I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath and process the magnitude of what had transpired. I was bruised, battered, and reeking of decay, but I was alive. However, the terror of what lay below and the myriad questions it raised would haunt me long after the pain of the fall had subsided. I sat on that cold ledge, the remnants of daylight fading into a tapestry of indigo and deep violet overhead. The forest seemed to hold its breath around me, and in the silence I made a silent vow. I would uncover the mystery behind that hidden mass grave, and I would learn why this place, the heart of America's wilderness, was hiding a secret so monstrous that even the bravest souls would tremble at its name. But as I wrapped my arms around my aching body, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a promise of more horrors to come. I could not shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me from the shadows, a silent observer to the unearthing of truths best left buried. And with that thought, I knew that my ordeal was only just beginning. Clambering from the brink of that hidden pit, every aching muscle in my body pulsed with both relief and dread. The cold air of northern Maine wrapped around me as I began my uncertain journey back toward civilization. Yet, as I retraced my steps along a barely visible path, the forest itself seemed to murmur secrets that would chill even the most seasoned park ranger. My mind was a tumult of questions. What had that pit concealed? How had a hidden mass grave gone unnoticed in a park as famed for its rugged beauty as Baxter State? The images of the slick, shadowed walls, the mounds that resembled graves, and the fleeting glimpse of a monstrous visage haunted me. Even now, as I moved beneath towering pines and gnarled hardwoods, their branches forming eerie silhouettes against a bruised sky, I could feel the heavy presence of something unnatural, stirring in the darkness of the woods. The trail, though faint, was familiar. I recalled that it led past a small ranger outpost, a weathered wooden cabin that had served as a haven during storms and emergencies. I hurried toward it, desperate for some human contact, some reassurance that I wasn't alone in facing the unspeakable. But the forest was anything but ordinary now. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig underfoot, echoed with a sinister undercurrent. It was as if the woods were alive, patiently observing my every move. As twilight deepened, the canopy above seemed to close in, muting the last vestiges of daylight. I recalled the lore passed down among park rangers, whispered stories of the whispering woods, a term used to describe stretches of forest where the wind carried voices. Voices of long-forgotten souls, warning of impending doom. I had always dismissed these tales as mere folklore, yet tonight, with the memories of that pit vivid in my mind, I found them disturbingly plausible. I pressed on, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot providing a grim cadence to my thoughts. The smell of decay still clung to me like a second skin, a persistent reminder of that horror below. Every step was measured and cautious. My senses were straining for any sign of movement or threat. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt as if I were being drawn into a labyrinth of old growth and darker secrets. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, only to vanish when I focused on them. Phantom shapes that left me questioning the boundary between reality and nightmare. Soon, I came upon a small clearing, its center dominated by an ancient oak whose twisted roots snaked out across the ground like the fingers of a long-dead giant. Beneath the tree, scattered remnants of old campfires and forgotten belongings suggested that others had sought refuge here in days past. I knelt to inspect these relics, half expecting them to yield clues about the grim events hidden beneath the forest floor. Instead, I found little more than charred wood and brittle remnants of paper, their inscriptions too faded to read clearly. Yet, among these detritus lay a single object, a battered notebook, its cover worn and water-stained. Its presence was jarringly out of place amid the natural decay. Cautiously, I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with hurried, almost frantic handwriting. It recounted strange occurrences, disappearances in the woods, inexplicable phenomena near the old logging roads, and, most disturbingly, references to the pit and the eyes of death that watched over the land. There were sketches, too, crude illustrations of faceless figures, twisted trees, and bizarre symbols scrawled in the margins. One entry, dated nearly 2 decades ago, mentioned that a secret burial site was maintained by those sworn to protect the forest's ancient balance. A balance that, once disturbed, would exact a terrible price. The notebook ended abruptly, as if the writer had been forced to flee in terror. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I absorbed the implications. This wasn't an isolated incident of a misplaced accident. It was part of a larger, darker tapestry woven into the very fabric of these woods. The forest itself seemed to breathe with a life of its own, a malignant spirit born of forgotten tragedies and untold horrors. I closed the notebook with trembling fingers, resolving to return it to the outpost for analysis later. But a nagging question persisted. If this pit was known, why had no one done anything about it? Had it been hidden deliberately, or was it a relic of an even older, more inexplicable ritual? I continued my trek through the woods, my pace quickening as the sky deepened into an inky blue. The whisper of the wind through the treetops took on an almost conversational tone. I heard what could have been words, a low murmur, like someone softly calling my name, though I dared not stop to listen. I felt eyes upon me, unseen but omnipresent, watching me from behind every cluster of ferns and gnarled trunk. The sensation was not merely unsettling, it was a palpable, oppressive pressure that made each step forward feel like an intrusion into a sacred, forbidden domain. With the night fully upon me, I activated the small headlamp on my belt. The narrow beam carved a swath of light through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the forest's grotesque underbelly. Twisted branches, gnarled and skeletal, reached out as if to snare an unsuspecting traveler. In the beam's flickering glow, I could almost see shapes shifting in the dark, fleeting silhouettes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. My thoughts darted back to the notebook's frantic scribbles and the idea of an ancient force guarding this place. Was it possible that my fall into that pit was no accident, but a deliberate act orchestrated by the forest itself? The path led me to a narrow, meandering trail that wound deeper into a part of the woods known only to the most experienced rangers. It was here that the legends spoke of watchers, mysterious figures said to protect the secrets of the wilderness. I had always assumed these were exaggerated tales, but now I felt their weight as if they were pressing upon my very soul. The wind seemed to carry their murmurs, echoing softly as if in warning. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of movement among the trees, a rustle too deliberate to be merely the passing of a squirrel. Time lost all meaning as I trudged onward. My mind raced, cataloging every strange sound, every flicker of shadow. The forest had become a living entity, an enigma that demanded answers. I recalled my training and all the stories shared by veterans of the service, tales of unexpected encounters in the backcountry, of unseen forces that defied explanation. Now, the line between myth and reality blurred with every step. The natural world, which I had always revered for its beauty and resilience, revealed a hidden side, a dark, ancient force that governed these lands long before modern civilization arrived. The deeper I went, the more I began to question my own sanity. Was the forest truly speaking to me, or was it the remnants of my own fractured thoughts, spurred by trauma and isolation? The gentle hum of the night, the rustling leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl blended into a symphony of eerie sounds that could drive a man to madness. Yet I pressed on, driven by a compulsion I could neither deny nor fully understand. I had to reach the outpost and report what I had found, not only for my own safety, but for the sake of preserving the truth behind the sinister history of this park. At one point, the trail led me to a small creek. The water, clear and cold, whispered over smooth stones, creating a momentary contrast to the foreboding environment. I knelt beside it, cupping my hands to take a drink, and as the chill of the water soothed my parched throat, I allowed myself a fleeting moment of calm. But even there, the whispers persisted, now mingling with the rush of the current, as if the creek itself carried messages from the depths of the forest. I felt an inexplicable urgency to follow its course, to see where it led, hoping it might reveal more clues about the origins of that terrible pit. Winding along the banks of the creek, the forest grew denser. The trees clustered so tightly that they blocked out even the feeble beam of my headlamp. Shadows deepened, and I could feel the oppressive weight of centuries pressing down on me. I recalled the stories of indigenous tribes who had once lived in these lands, of ancient rituals and a profound respect for the natural order, stories that hinted at a balance between life and death, maintained through secret ceremonies. Perhaps, I mused, the pit was a remnant of such ancient practices, a hidden altar to forces beyond human control. The thought was both fascinating and terrifying. Just as I began to form a theory, a sudden movement in the corner of my eye snapped me back to reality. I froze, heart hammering, as I strained to see through the darkness. A figure, small, almost indistinct, darted behind a stand of birch trees. For a long, breathless moment, I was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and the need to understand. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure was gone. Had I imagined it, or was it one of the watchers from the old stories, a guardian of these cursed woods? I couldn't be sure. Every sense screamed at me that the forest was not empty, that every shadow concealed an unspoken threat. I resumed my walk with heightened vigilance, the crunch of the undergrowth beneath my boots now a drumbeat of impending danger. The night stretched on, the darkness enveloping me as I navigated a maze of tangled brush and ancient trees. With every step, the memory of that pit and its unspeakable horrors returned, mingling with the eerie sounds of the forest to create a symphony of dread and forewarning. Eventually, the creek led me to a fork in the path. One branch continued deeper into the heart of the woods, where the silence was nearly absolute, and the other veered off toward what looked like signs of human activity. A barely visible trail, overgrown but unmistakably man-made. Though every instinct urged me to follow the latter, I hesitated. The deeper trail whispered of secrets buried beneath layers of time, of lost souls and hidden rituals. In that moment, I realized that the answers to my questions might lie just beyond the next bend. I steeled myself, choosing the path that promised confrontation with the forest's darkest secrets. As I proceeded, the whispering of the woods grew ever more insistent, a low, continuous murmur that vibrated beneath my skin. I could almost decipher fragments of words that spoke of ancient wrongs and a debt that nature itself was determined to collect. My mind teetered between rational thought and the gnawing possibility that I was intruding on something far beyond human comprehension. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, a journey into the very heart of a mystery that had plagued these woods for generations. By the time I emerged into a small clearing, the oppressive darkness seemed to lift just enough for me to catch sight of a dilapidated sign half consumed by ivy. Faded letters read, "Pine Hollow Wildlife Preserve." I recalled vague memories of hearing that name mentioned in old ranger logs. Stories of unexplained disappearances and eerie phenomena, of nature reclaiming what was once taken by man. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. I knew then that my discovery of the pit was merely the beginning. The forest was calling me to uncover its hidden history, to confront a past that had been shrouded in secrecy and terror. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the sign marking the threshold between what was known and what lay in darkness. My footsteps echoed softly in the stillness, each one a solemn promise that I would not rest until I had unraveled the truth behind the whispering woods and the unspeakable horror beneath the earth. With the notebook clutched tightly in my hand, I pressed onward, unaware that each step would lead me further into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. And as the clearing faded behind me, swallowed once more by the ancient trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, a silent, calculating presence waiting in the depths of the forest to see if I was truly worthy of uncovering its secrets. The forest seemed to exhale a slow, measured breath as I pressed on along the forgotten trail. Every step resonated with the weight of history and the unmistakable presence of something older than the land itself. The battered notebook, clutched tightly in my gloved hand, was my only tangible link to the secrets that haunted these woods. And with each stride I took deeper into the darkness, its cryptic messages grew more urgent and foreboding. I reached a clearing that was dominated by the remnants of a long-abandoned ranger station. The structure was little more than a crumbling wooden frame, its once sturdy walls now splintered and overtaken by ivy and moss. The air around it was heavy with the scent of damp decay and the whisper of memories. It was here that I felt the first real tremor of unease, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that suggested I was no longer alone in my pursuit of the truth. Inside the ruined building, shafts of moonlight pierced the broken windows, illuminating a chaos of scattered files, rusted equipment, and faded photographs pinned to a corkboard. Each fragment told a story of the past, a time when the land was fiercely guarded and its mysteries meticulously documented by those who had long since vanished. As I sifted through the debris, I discovered yellowed documents with handwritten notes, maps of the park marked with cryptic symbols, and even a faded portrait of a stern-faced man in a ranger uniform. The man's eyes, though blurred by time, seemed to follow me, as if imploring me to uncover the truth that had been hidden for decades. One document in particular caught my attention, a tattered journal belonging to a former ranger named Harold Whitman. His entries were raw and desperate, chronicling a series of events that echoed the very horrors I had just experienced. Whitman described strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances near hidden pits, whispers in the wind that spoke of retribution, and shadows that moved with a malevolent intelligence. His final entry ended abruptly with a hastily scrawled warning. "They come from the depths when the land bleeds, and only the forgotten know the price of disturbing the balance." Every word sent shivers down my spine. I felt as if I were retracing the steps of someone who had seen the abyss and paid dearly for his curiosity. With the journal in my possession, I resolved to piece together the fragments of this dark history. I carefully examined the maps, noting a series of markings that converged around one location deeper in the park, a spot ominously labeled the Weeping Ridge. The name resonated with me, evoking a sense of mourning and ancient sorrow. Could this be the nexus of the strange events, the cursed heart where the past and the present intertwined in a dance of death and despair? Leaving the dilapidated station behind, I navigated by the flickering beam of my headlamp and the cryptic instructions from Whitman's journal. The path wound along a narrow ridge that overlooked a churning valley, shrouded in mist and dappled with the ghostly luminescence of moonlight. Every rustle of the undergrowth and every snap of a brittle twig underfoot reminded me that I was intruding on a realm not meant for the living. The forest here was a living testament to loss, a silent archive of all that had been forgotten, buried beneath layers of time and neglect. As I trekked higher, the temperature dropped sharply, and an eerie quiet settled over the land. The trees seemed to huddle together, their gnarled branches interlocking like skeletal fingers, as if to keep the secrets of the ridge tightly guarded. I could sense that I was nearing something significant, a point where nature itself bore the scars of a terrible past. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant echoes of sorrowful whispers that might have been the lamentations of those long gone. My pulse raced in tandem with the increasing intensity of the silence, each beat a reminder of my own fragility in the face of the overwhelming unknown. At last, I reached the summit of Weeping Ridge. Before me stretched a desolate plateau marked by a circle of ancient stones, half buried in the frost-laden earth. The stones were etched with symbols that defied immediate interpretation, a blend of Native American iconography and something more cryptic, almost otherworldly. Their presence spoke of rituals and ceremonies that had been performed long before modern records were kept, a sacred language of loss and renewal passed down through generations. I knelt by one of the larger stones, tracing my fingers over its rough surface as I tried to decipher its meaning. The symbols, worn by the passage of time, were still distinct enough to evoke a deep sense of mourning. In that moment, I felt the oppressive weight of history, an endless cycle of sacrifice and retribution, and I understood that this place was not merely a marker of the past, but a conduit for something far more sinister. The energy here was palpable, as if the very ground was steeped in the sorrow and anger of those whose lives had been snuffed out in an unrecorded tragedy. A sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering dry leaves and stirring a swirl of dust around the stones. The noise of the wind was punctuated by a distant, mournful cry. An animal, perhaps, or something far less natural. I rose to my feet, my heart pounding, and surveyed the ridge with a mixture of determination and dread. The journal's words echoed in my mind. Only the forgotten know the price of disturbing the balance. I couldn't help but wonder if my intrusion was already tipping that balance, drawing the attention of forces best left undisturbed. In the distance, faint figures began to emerge, shadows moving with deliberate slowness among the trees. I couldn't discern their shapes clearly, but their presence was undeniable. Were they the ghosts of those lost, or something else entirely? I recalled Whitman's account of watchers, spectral beings said to guard the ancient rites of the land. The figures moved silently, their forms blending with the darkness, as if they were part of the ridge itself. I felt a surge of both fear and an inexplicable compulsion to follow them. Perhaps they held the answers I sought, or maybe they were the last line of defense for secrets that should never be disturbed. Driven by a mixture of duty and an insatiable need to uncover the truth, I began to trail the spectral figures, careful to maintain a respectful distance. They led me to the edge of a dense copse of trees where the ground descended sharply into a shadowy ravine. The ravine was lined with ancient oaks, their gnarled roots twisting over the precipice like the veins of a dying giant. In the center of the ravine lay a shallow pool of water, its surface eerily still and reflecting the star-studded sky above. The pool seemed out of place in the harsh, rugged terrain, a tranquil mirror set against the backdrop of natural brutality. As I approached, I noticed that the water's edge was strewn with fragments of pottery and worn relics, remnants of an ancient culture that had once revered these lands. Each piece told a story of lives intertwined with nature's mysteries, a people who, perhaps, had long understood the delicate equilibrium between the living and the dead. I carefully collected a shard of pottery, its surface etched with designs that resonated with the symbols on the stones at the ridge. This was no accident. The pieces were deliberately placed, as if to mark the pool as a sacred site, a place where the past was meant to be honored and remembered. I settled on a large, flat rock by the pool and unfurled the pages of Whitman's journal once more. The dim glow of my headlamp danced over the ink-stained words, and I found myself drawn to an entry that described a ritual, a way to communicate with the spirits of the forest. Whitman had written of an ancient rite performed on nights when the moon was hidden, a ceremony meant to summon the guardians of the land and seek their counsel. The entry was detailed, outlining the precise placement of stones, the incantations whispered in a language lost to time, and the sacrifice that was required to bridge the gap between worlds. My mind raced as I considered the implications. Had the events I'd witnessed, the hidden pit, the mass grave, the spectral watchers, been the unintended consequence of such a ritual gone awry? Or worse, had someone deliberately sought to harness the power of the ancient rites, sacrificing lives in the process? The answers lay somewhere in the convergence of these mysteries, woven together by the fabric of history and the relentless passage of time. I spent what felt like hours poring over the journal and studying the relics scattered around me. The cold night deepened, and with it came an uncanny silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The weight of my discoveries pressed upon me, leaving me with more questions than answers. I could sense that every artifact, every whispered word of the past, was a piece of a puzzle that spanned centuries. A puzzle that threatened to reveal truths that many might prefer to leave hidden. Just as I was beginning to piece together the fragments of this ancient enigma, a sudden, sharp sound shattered the silence, a rustling in the brush behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, to find a solitary figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Cloaked in shadow, the figure was almost indistinguishable from the darkness. Yet there was something deliberate in its stillness, an air of authority that belied its spectral form. I could not tell if it was human or something far older, a guardian of these forsaken rites. For several agonizing moments, we simply regarded one another in silence. In that frozen instant, I felt as though I were caught between worlds, between the rational explanations of a park ranger's mind and the mystical, unfathomable reality of ancient forces at play. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from deep within the earth itself, the figure spoke. "You should not be here." The words were both a warning and a plea, resonating with sorrow and ancient regret. My throat tightened as I mustered the courage to reply. "I'm trying to understand," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I've seen things, terrible things. I need to know why this land is cursed." The figure's eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to glisten with a timeless sadness. "The past is not for the living to disturb," it intoned. "Every secret carries a cost, and every revelation exacts its due. Some mysteries are best left undisturbed, for the balance must be maintained." I felt the full force of those words as they reverberated through my very soul. The enormity of my intrusion into this ancient ritual, this nexus of sorrow and retribution, sank in with paralyzing clarity. The spectral guardian stepped closer, and I could now discern the faint outline of weathered tattoos and symbolic markings along its arms, runes of protection and binding that hinted at rituals long forgotten. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me feared that knowing the answer might shatter the fragile remnants of my sanity. The guardian hesitated, its gaze drifting toward the pool as if recalling memories of eons past. "I am a keeper," it finally replied, its tone imbued with both resignation and an almost desperate hope. "A keeper of the old ways, bound to ensure that what once was does not rise again." The word struck me with the force of a revelation. Here, in the heart of these cursed woods, I was not alone in my quest for truth. There were others, spectral remnants perhaps, or living witnesses, dedicated to safeguarding the ancient balance. And if my presence here threatened to upset that balance, then I was treading on dangerous ground indeed. As the wind picked up once more, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the muted cries of unseen souls, the keeper slowly receded back into the shadows. "Go back," the voice murmured, "and remember that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." Left alone with the spectral echoes of that parting warning, I sat there by the pool, the journal and relics my only companions in this twilight realm of secrets. I knew that the journey ahead would force me to confront not only the monstrous legacies of the past, but also the darkness that resided within me. The weight of the ancient curse pressed down on me, and I could sense that the forest was awakening to my intrusion, its murmurs growing louder, its presence more insistent. In that quiet, suspended moment, I resolved to continue my investigation, even as dread coiled around my heart. The mysteries of Weeping Ridge, the hidden pit, and the mass grave were inextricably linked, and the spectral warnings echoed in my mind like a funeral dirge. I could not turn back, not when the answers to these timeless riddles might be the key to stopping a cycle of retribution that had haunted these woods for generations. I gathered the relics and journal with trembling determination and retraced my steps through the darkening forest. Each footprint I left behind was a silent testament to the collision of worlds: the rational, modern world of a park ranger and the ancient mystical forces that governed these wild lands. The night deepened further, the stars emerging in a tapestry of cold, indifferent light overhead, as I made my way back toward the shadowy outline of the abandoned station. But even as I moved forward, I could not shake the sense that my every step was being watched, not only by the spectral keepers of old, but by something far more ominous, something that had been stirred awake by my intrusion, and now lurked in the depths of the forest, waiting for the moment to exact its terrible toll. And so, with the chilling echo of the keeper's words etched into my mind, "Some doors once opened cannot be closed," I stepped into the night, my heart heavy with foreboding, and my resolve hardened by the mysteries I had begun to unravel. The past was rising from its slumber, and I could only pray that I would be able to withstand the revelations yet to come. The journey back to the abandoned station felt less like a retreat and more like a forced pilgrimage into the heart of an unspeakable nightmare. Every step on the uneven forest floor echoed in my ears, a staccato reminder of the ancient curse I had unwittingly disturbed. I couldn't shake the spectral words from the clearing. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. They reverberated like a death knell as the night deepened around me, and the forest's once familiar whisper became a chorus of lamentations. The oppressive darkness pressed in on every side. I struggled to keep my thoughts linear as the landscape shifted into a disorienting maze of towering pines and tangled undergrowth. It was as if the forest itself were conspiring to keep me lost, erasing any markers of my earlier passage. My headlamp's feeble beam revealed fleeting images: rusted chains half buried in the loam, moss-covered totems that looked far too deliberate to be natural formations, and carvings on tree trunks that bore uncanny resemblances to the symbols I had seen on the ancient stones at Weeping Ridge. I pressed forward, driven by a mixture of duty and a dread-fueled compulsion to learn more, even if that knowledge might unravel the last threads of my sanity. With each cautious step, I recalled Whitman's dire warnings and the cryptic advice of the spectral keeper. The forest had already shown me that it was a place where the living and the dead communed. Now, it was determined to drag me deeper into its dark embrace. Not long after leaving the ridge, I stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown trail that led to an area I recognized from older patrol maps, an area once used by the Park Service for routine surveys. The crumbling stone wall that marked its boundary now lay shattered, overtaken by aggressive ivy and the passage of time. In the distance, I could just make out a structure, what appeared to be a long-abandoned ranger's outbuilding, its silhouette barely visible through the trees. Instinctively, I thought of shelter and a momentary reprieve from the encroaching dread. Yet every fiber of my being warned me that here, too, the forest held its secrets close. Inside the building, remnants of old equipment and faded photographs littered the floor. Dust motes danced in the narrow beams of moonlight that pierced the broken windows, and the air was thick with the musk of decay. I moved cautiously, scanning for any clues that might help piece together the horrifying tableau I had begun to witness. The walls were lined with outdated maps and logs, a silent testimony to decades of routine that had been abruptly ended by an unknown calamity. My fingers trembled as I leafed through a battered logbook. The entries were sporadic at first, but grew increasingly frantic over time, culminating in a final entry that simply read, "They are coming, and the woods will drink us all." The note sent a chill racing down my spine. It was as if I were retracing the steps of those who had vanished into this living nightmare long before me. The author's scrawl was jagged, desperate, a plea to warn those who might one day stumble upon this forsaken place. I set the logbook aside, my mind swirling with questions. Who were they? Had these people encountered the same unspeakable force that now haunted my every step? I could feel the forest's ancient pulse intensify, as if stirred by the echoes of past despair. I left the building and stepped back into the wild, where the night had grown even darker and more suffocating. The wind picked up, carrying with it a low, mournful howl, a sound that seemed to merge with the natural rustling of the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed a narrow trail that led deeper into a grove of gnarled, ancient trees. Their twisted trunks and sprawling roots formed natural archways overhead, and I could almost sense that they were silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the past. The forest floor was littered with debris that hinted at human activity: discarded bottles, torn scraps of fabric, and even fragments of personal belongings that had likely belonged to those who had come before me. Every piece was a silent testament to lives interrupted by an unfathomable force. I paused near a small clearing where a rusted hat lay forgotten on the ground, its insignia barely visible through layers of grime. The sight of it, so ordinary yet so out of place, stirred memories of lost souls and the harsh, indifferent passage of time. As I pressed on, a disquieting sensation began to seep into my bones, a feeling of being utterly exposed, as if unseen eyes tracked my every move. The trees, once a source of comfort in their steadfast presence, now loomed like silent judges. I could almost hear the low, unspoken murmur of their leaves, a timeless conversation about transgressions and retribution. Every step further into the darkness felt like a step closer to an inevitable reckoning. After what felt like an interminable trek, I arrived at a clearing dominated by a bizarre, almost surreal sight. A circle of enormous boulders arranged in an almost ritualistic pattern. Their surfaces were etched with cryptic symbols, and the remnants of what appeared to be bloodstains, dark and ominous against the stone. In the center of the circle lay a shallow depression filled with stagnant water that mirrored the starless sky. The scene was both haunting and mesmerizing, a forgotten altar where nature and something far more sinister seemed to have intersected. I knelt at the edge of the depression, the chill of the stone seeping into my skin. My breath was shallow as I stared into the water, half expecting to see spectral images ripple beneath the surface. Instead, the water remained eerily still, a silent witness to centuries of unspoken tragedies. I could feel a strange pull, as if the depression were a vortex drawing in the sorrow and malevolence of the past. My mind raced with the possibility that this was the very heart of the curse, the nexus from which all the horrors of the woods emanated. Time lost meaning as I lingered there, my thoughts a tumult of fear, regret, and grim determination. I recalled the spectral keeper's words and Whitman's desperate warnings, and I felt the weight of history crushing me. I resolved to document everything: the logbook from the outbuilding, the old maps, the arrangement of the boulders, as I might someday need to piece together the dreadful puzzle of this place. Each clue was a lifeline to understanding the ancient forces that governed these cursed lands. But as I began to gather my scattered notes and take photographs with my camera, a sudden shift in the atmosphere stole my attention. The temperature plummeted, and an almost tangible darkness seemed to descend, coiling around me like a living shroud. I heard a distant, echoing chant that reverberated through the clearing, a rhythmic incantation that made my skin crawl. The sound was neither male nor female, but an ancient, resonant vibration that resonated deep within my bones. It was as if the very earth beneath me was speaking in a language older than time itself. Before I could react, the water in the depression began to ripple violently, as if something beneath its surface was stirring to life. My pulse quickened, and I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from the mesmerizing yet horrifying sight. Shapes formed beneath the water's surface, vague, undulating forms that seemed to pulse with an inner light. I couldn't decide whether it was the reflection of the boulders above or the presence of something far more sinister emerging from the depths. Suddenly, the rhythmic chant grew louder, echoing from all around me as if the forest had come alive with a dark, unified purpose. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I stumbled backward, nearly colliding with one of the enormous boulders. My head swam with a cacophony of whispered voices. For a moment, I felt as if I were caught in a vortex between reality and nightmare. The voices spoke of ancient rites, of sacrifices made in the name of balance, and of debts that could never be repaid. I had heard legends of such occurrences, tales of cursed grounds where the boundary between life and death was dissolved by rituals performed in forgotten times. Now, standing on that chilling altar, I realized that I was no longer an outsider peering into a strange phenomenon. I was an unwitting participant, a lone park ranger thrust into a continuum of horror that spanned generations. As the chanting reached a fevered pitch, I felt a sudden pressure at the back of my neck. I turned slowly to see a dark figure emerging from behind a massive oak, its features obscured by shadows and the inky darkness of the night. The figure moved with a deliberate grace, its presence radiating an aura of ancient authority and sorrow. My breath caught in my throat as it stepped forward, and I could make out the faint glint of eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom and torment of countless ages. The figure's voice, soft yet imbued with an unmistakable command, cut through the madness of the moment. You have trespassed into the domain of our forgotten ancestors. The debt you owe is not measured in words, but in the very essence of your soul. The words were as clear as if spoken in my own mind, and I felt an inexplicable chill ripple through me. Frozen in place, I could only watch as the figure extended a hand toward the water. In response, the stagnant pool began to churn, and a spectral form, a visage both beautiful and terrifying, rose slowly from its depths. It bore the unmistakable markings of ancient ritual, elaborate tattoos and patterns that defied earthly design, and eyes that glowed with a fierce, otherworldly light. In that moment, I realized that this was the culmination of everything, the nexus of the ancient curse, the manifestation of the forest's sorrow and retribution. The spectral form regarded me with an expression of deep, mournful regret, as if it carried the weight of all those who had perished in this cursed place. "You have awakened forces beyond your ken," it intoned, its voice a harmonized blend of grief and fury. "In seeking to unravel the mysteries of these woods, you have set in motion a chain of events that will echo through the ages." Its gaze pierced my very soul, and I felt my will bending beneath the gravity of its presence. I tried to speak, to plead for mercy or understanding, but the words caught in my throat. All I could manage was a choked whisper. What have I done?" The spectral figure's eyes, brimming with ancient sorrow, seemed to weep for the lost and the damned. "You have opened a door that should have remained closed," it whispered, each word laced with an inescapable finality. "Now, the darkness that has long slumbered must rise, and the forest will reclaim what was once taken." In that moment, the spectral form began to fade, its features dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadows and light. The chanting receded into a low, mournful hum, leaving behind a silence so profound that it roared in my ears. I staggered back from the altar, my heart pounding with terror. and the crushing weight of inevitable fate. The forest around me seemed to shift, its ancient eyes watching in silent judgment. I knew then that my journey had irrevocably changed. No longer was I merely a park ranger on a routine patrol. Now I was entangled in a saga that stretched far beyond the bounds of mortal reckoning. The debt that had been incurred could not be undone, and the forest, in its relentless, inscrutable way, demanded a reckoning. As I turned to leave the clearing, every instinct screamed to run, to escape the clutches of a curse centuries in the making. Yet I found myself compelled to move forward, as if drawn by an unseen force into the very heart of darkness. My every step was heavy with the knowledge that the ancient powers had been awakened, and that they would not rest until the balance was restored through a price far steeper than I had ever imagined. I left the altar behind with a soul burdened by dread, stepping back into a forest that now felt overtly malevolent. The path ahead was shrouded in mist and uncertainty, each rustle and whisper a portent of calamity yet to come. The spectral voices of the past mingled with my own racing thoughts, leaving me to wonder if I would ever find a way to break free of the debt that the woods had exacted from me. And so, with the chilling echo of that final warning reverberating in my mind, I ventured onward, into a darkness that promised no salvation, only the relentless descent into a nightmare from which there might be no return. The forest had become a maelstrom of shadows and whispers as I staggered onward, my body battered and my mind teetering on the brink of collapse. Every step forward was punctuated by a deep, insidious dread, as though the ancient forces I had disturbed were now stalking my every move. The debt incurred by my trespass had awakened something primal, a relentless hunger for balance that would stop at nothing to claim its due. I had left behind the eerie altar of boulders and the spectral incantations that had foretold my fate, but the memory of that place seared into my soul like a brand. The words of the spectral guardian and the mournful lamentations of the chanting still echoed in my ears. You have opened a door that should have remained closed. Now the darkness must rise. With those words as my constant companion, I trudged deeper into the labyrinthine forest, uncertain if salvation lay at its edge or if I was destined to be consumed by the very curse I had awakened. The canopy above had thickened into an impenetrable shroud, allowing only scattered flecks of starlight to illuminate a path that was as treacherous as it was uncharted. I moved along a narrow, winding trail carved by nature's indifferent hand, my every sense alert to the slightest disturbance. The undergrowth was heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, a smell that now held the bitter tang of inevitability. I recalled fragments of lost patrol logs, whispered accounts from long-retired rangers, and the chilling lore of indigenous legends that spoke of a price exacted by the land when its sanctity was violated. As the hours bled into one another, the forest transformed before my eyes. Trees twisted into grotesque silhouettes, their bark marked with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the gloom. The natural order had given way to a surreal tableau of horror. Clearings where the ground was unnaturally smooth, as if the earth had been scraped bare by some unseen force, and ponds of water that shimmered with an otherworldly iridescence. I began to question whether I was still in the realm of the living, or if I had been thrust into a liminal space where time and reality had lost all meaning. At one point, I came upon a forgotten crossroads deep in the woods. An old rusted signpost jutted out of the forest floor, its lettering almost illegible from years of neglect. Dead Man's Bend, 5 miles. The name sent a shiver down my spine, and I hesitated at the intersection. Every instinct screamed that I should turn back, yet I felt a magnetic pull urging me onward. It was as if the forest itself had chosen me to bear witness to its unspeakable secrets. Choosing the path toward Dead Man's Bend, I moved slowly, each footstep measured and deliberate. The further I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though the boundary between the physical and the spectral was dissolving. I could no longer tell if the rustling in the underbrush was merely the wind, or if it was the soft tread of figures unseen. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of pale, spectral shapes moving at the edge of my vision. Flickers of light and shadow that vanished when I tried to focus on them. The trail eventually led me to a desolate clearing, dominated by a massive, ancient oak, the kind of tree that legends claim to be as old as the land itself. Its gnarled limbs stretched out like arms in supplication, and its bark bore deep scars that seemed to tell a story of violence and loss. Beneath the oak lay a small weathered stone pedestal, upon which rested an object that made my heart seize with dread. A tarnished brass key, its intricate design clearly wrought with symbols, echoing those I had seen etched on the boulders at Weeping Ridge. I knelt before the pedestal, the key glinting in the sparse moonlight as if beckoning me. In that moment, I recalled a line from Whitman's journal. Only the forgotten know the price of disturbing the balance. It struck me that this key was not merely a relic, but perhaps the last vestige of an ancient ritual, a token meant to seal away the darkness once more. With trembling hands, I picked it up, feeling its cool metal against my skin, as though it were a part of the forest's living memory. The act felt both sacrilegious and imperative, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control over events spiraling far beyond my understanding. No sooner had I grasped the key than the forest erupted in a sudden, violent stillness. The air around me grew unnaturally cold, and the sky overhead churned with swirling clouds that obscured the stars. I heard the sound of distant drums, a heartbeat of the earth itself, as if nature were summoning its ancient guardians. The spectral figures that had haunted my every step emerged from the shadows in a slow, deliberate procession. Their forms were ethereal, almost translucent, yet imbued with an undeniable authority. They circled around the oak in silent vigil, their eyes, if they could be called that, fixed upon me. A figure stepped forward from the procession, a tall, imposing specter draped in tattered robes that shimmered with hints of forgotten eras. Its face was a haunting mask of sorrow and resolve, its eyes deep pools of ancient knowledge. In a voice that resonated with both the echo of lost ages and the immediacy of raw grief, it spoke. "You have borne witness to our suffering and unleashed a debt that must be repaid. The key you now hold is our covenant, a bond between the living and the dead. With it, you may either restore the balance or forever be chained to our fate." The words sent a shudder of terror through my very core. I realized then that my journey was not simply one of survival. It was a reckoning with forces that transcended mortal life. The key was both a chance at redemption and a harbinger of eternal damnation. The specter continued, its tone imbued with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "Choose wisely, guardian of the present. Seal the portal, and the cycle of sorrow shall end, or wield its power to unlock the gate, and the darkness shall claim all who dwell in the light." I was caught in a vortex of indecision. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath, awaiting my verdict. My mind raced with images of those lost souls whose echoes had driven me to this point, and with the cold logic of duty as a park ranger, a keeper of nature's sanctity, I knew what had to be done. With shaking resolve, I stepped forward and pressed the brass key into a small, keyhole-like indentation carved into the pedestal. The act was both symbolic and literal, as if I were merging my fate with that of the ancient forest. In that instant, the ground trembled, and a surge of luminous energy erupted from the oak's roots, spiraling upward to form a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The spectral guardians joined in a haunting chorus of sound, a lament for the past and a promise for the future, while the very air shimmered with the power of long-forgotten rites. I felt the pull of that vortex deep within my soul, as though it were attempting to erase the boundaries between my essence and the wilderness itself. Time became elastic as I was enveloped in the vortex's luminous embrace. Visions of history flooded my senses, images of ancient tribes performing sacred ceremonies, of rangers from bygone eras standing guard over these lands, and of countless souls lost to the relentless march of nature's retribution. Each vision bore its own weight of grief and resolve, painting a picture of a balance maintained at a terrible cost. In that moment I understood that I was not the first to be confronted by the curse, nor would I be the last. The vortex pulsed with a brilliant radiance, then slowly began to subside. The spectral procession receded into the shadows, and the oppressive chill gave way to a calm that was almost surreal. I found myself standing alone beneath the ancient oak, the brass key still clutched tightly in my hand. The clearing, once haunted by the murmurs of spectral voices, was now silent, a silence that carried with it both sorrow and hope. For a long moment I simply stood there, absorbing the magnitude of what had transpired. The curse, it seemed, was not vanquished, but transformed. A part of the land's eternal cycle, bound by ancient oaths, and renewed by the courage of those willing to face the darkness. I had become an unwilling custodian of this secret, forever marked by the debt of the past and the promise of redemption. Yet, as I turned to retrace my steps, a final, lingering question echoed in the depths of my mind. Had I truly restored the balance, or had I merely delayed the inevitable reckoning? The forest whispered its timeless secrets in the rustle of the leaves and the sigh of the wind, leaving me with an enduring uncertainty, a mystery that would haunt me for the rest of my days. With a heavy heart and a soul forever altered, I stepped away from the clearing. I knew that the park, with its breathtaking beauty and hidden terrors, would never be the same. The secrets of these ancient woods were now mine to guard, a legacy of loss and defiance against the inexorable march of fate. And somewhere, in the endless twilight between memory and myth, the spectral guardians kept their silent watch, reminders that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed.